The truth occurs. The truth occurs.
Hi everyone. As someone who has a bank account, one of my worst bank account nightmares would be that one day the government would decide that what was in my bank account was rightfully theirs and put their sticky fingers in there and help themselves to my money. And that's pretty much exactly what's happening to the people of Cyprus, whose government has decided to raid people's accounts and withdraw as much as 10% of their private funds to pay off a debt. Naturally, there's been a lot of backlash and people started taking all their money out, doing bank runs, and so Cyprus shut the banks as this bailout started to backfire. By today, the 19th, the news was that Cyprus moves bank tax focus away from low earners. This move to seize people's money was so highly unpopular that they finally came around and said, okay, we'll only seize the money from people who actually have quite a bit of funds in their accounts. But is this really any better? Probably not. And at this point, it's still possible that Cyprus will, at this point, reject the present bailout plan. Well, they said, well, you know, we're going to have to do something. Either we're going to stick our fingers, our sticky little fingers into your accounts, or we're going to have to put our sticky little fingers into your pockets some other way, such as through raising taxes or raising taxes. Putting the sticky little fingers into the accounts is probably the worst plan, as it is likely to even spark a Europe-wide financial crisis. Well, this is pretty logical. If Europeans start to realize that there's a possibility that their government may put sticky fingers into their accounts as well, well, they might start doing bank runs too. And then what happens? European financial collapse, which entails a world financial collapse, which would be something like what we had a few years ago with the stock market crash. And here's something interesting. There's another part to this story, a whole other side. As they mention here on globalresearch.ca, Berlin's portrayal of the measures as a policy targeting Russian oligarchs using Cyprus as a tax shelter did nothing to lessen public outrage. Of course, it wouldn't lessen public outrage. But what is all this talk about this somehow involving the Russian mafia? Russia sees Cyprus' plan as unfair plot to seize money of its citizens. Russia has very high taxes that they impose on businesses, and the Russian businesses are not allowed to just put their holdings in offshore banks. However, they are allowed to have subsidiaries in other countries. And so this is what was happening. These big Russian companies, many of them involved with mafia, were opening up subsidiaries in Cyprus and putting that money in Cyprus banks. At this time, Russians, including Russian mafia, hold more than half of the total of foreign deposits in Cypriot banks. And this might be one reason why Cyprus is reconsidering this whole sticky fingers in the bank accounts thing, because that would go into the bank accounts of these big, huge Russian businesses, including some with mafia affiliations. And as everybody knows, you don't mess with the Russian mafia. So we've yet to find out how the government of Cyprus will decide and what the bailout terms will be. But if you're wondering, how did this happen in the first place? Well, Cyprus, a lot of their economy, well, most of their economy has to do with banking. And I just can't get over this. What they did was they bought Greek debt. So then when Greece had their financial crisis, the banks in Cyprus lost a lot of money. I just intuitively think that buying debt cannot be a good idea. I mean, if I was going to go out today and buy something, the last thing I would buy would be debt. So they bought all this debt, and when the debt was no longer worth anything, the banks were basically broke. And so they eventually had to go to the European Commission, the European Central Bank, and the IMF and ask for a bailout plan. And that's how they got to where they are now. And this is all very disturbing. You kind of have to wonder, could this happen over here? Obama moving to steal your pension plan? I'm sure that if they have a way that they can pick your pocket even more, they will figure it out. Our governments are always trying to pick our pockets. Up here they decide, well, you're going to have to pay an extra tax on this, you're going to have to pay an extra tax on that. Like, just tax us to death and then withhold services. Well, what are they spending all this money on? Well, if you live in America, your government spends most of its money on the military. Yeah, they spend it on the military. So where was I? Oh yeah, Obama wants to raid your private pension funds. Well, there's a woman, Professor Teresa Gilarducci, who came came up with a whole big plan of how the government could force people to abandon all their private pension funds, like their 401ks and IRAs and all these things that they have, and force them to have pension funds with the government. And they said that they would give it a really nice name. Government retirement accounts. Makes you feel really good, doesn't it? Having the government in charge of your retirement. Why does Obama want your retirement fund money? So he can give it to the military and to Wall Street, so their CEOs can go and get fancy pedicures and drink champagne and have expensive hookers. Look, I don't know how these things really work, but what I do know is that the government spends all their money on the military and all their money on paying interest to private banks, and it's like one big huge mafia. And then when they screw up, when the banks screw up because they're too centralized and they're buying debt, which, like I said, buying debt is a dumb thing to do. Why do you want to buy somebody's debt? It's debt. Then it just means that you paid to owe money. That's crazy. Anyway, they do all that, and then when things blow up in their face, who has to foot the bill? The people. This is just wrong. What can I say? Oh, I have an alternative plan, though. If you're wondering, what can you do to keep your money safe? This is what you do. First, you have to save your money, even the Canadian Tire money. And then what you do is you put it in a shoebox. So put it somewhere creative, and then that way the government will never be able to stick their sticky fingers in it. Well, leave me your comments if you have any suggestions on good ways to, save your money. Put it somewhere where the government won't put their sticky fingers in it. Leave me your comments, and thanks for listening to me, and I'll see you next time.